Achebe, professor of history at Michigan State. Achebe received her PhD from UCLA in 2000 and was a scholar in residence at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Her research interests involve the use of oral history and the study of women, gender, and sexuality in Nigeria. Her first book, Farmers, Traders, Warriors, and Kings, Female Power and Authority in Northern Igbo Land, 1900 to 1960, was published by Heinemann in 2005. Her second, The Female King of Colonial Nigeria, Ahebi Ubabe, published by Indiana University Press in 2011, recently won the Barbara Penny, Kanner, and Gita Chowdhury Book Awards of the Western Association of Women Historians. Welcome, Dr. Achebe.
Thank you so very much for having me.
We're delighted you could be here. Perhaps we could start by you briefly outlining your own background and how you came to this fascinating and important subject, to my mind, in this highly original and award-winning book, where you've pieced together the hitherto little-known, I expect outside Northern Igbo land, story of the life, exile, and the success in trade and politics, and finally the undoing by male gerontocracy and colonial officials of the king, or Eze, Ahebi.
Yes, I didn't start out my professional career wanting to do history. I was a theater major. And after I graduated with a BA in theater arts, I decided to move to Los Angeles to do film, documentary filmmaking. And it was when I was at UCLA that I sort of discovered, and I use the term discovered history, because as an undergrad I just didn't like history at all. And I think I didn't have very good teachers, so it was my least favorite subject. But at UCLA, waiting for the only Africanist filmmaker to return from his sabbatical, I knew that I had to confront this problem that I had with history. And that's when I walked into a history class taught by the late Professor Boniface Obichara. And really that began my history, my love affair with history. This was an African man standing in front of the class and telling a story that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. A story that I felt that I could relate to, and I saw myself for the first time in the history that was being recited in front of this class. So that was the beginning of this thing that I call my relationship with African history. I decided to do a PhD in African history. I knew that I wanted to write on the history of Igbo women. And that was easy because, I'm originally from Nigeria. I am an Igbo woman. So that was a simple decision for me to take. But what history and which Igbo women was more difficult. And I remember my advisor, Professor Beecher, at that time, just having me read these old school anthropological and ethnographical reports on Igbo land, trying to discern, trying to find out, what part of Igbo land I could sort of base my research on. I wanted to sort of create this niche for myself. And I will never, never forget page 158 of C.K. Meek's Law and Authority in a Primitive Tribe, I think is what he called it. It was this reference to an unnamed Igbo female king. And he didn't call her a female king, he called her a female Eze. He used the Igbo term Eze, which is king. C.K. Meek knew about and wrote about queens, and there's an Igbo word for queen, Ezewai. He didn't use that term. And so it was that one little sentence that made me decide that this was the region, this was a part of Igbo land that I wanted to focus my research on. And so, that's where Northern Igbo land, the Nsukka, the old Nsukka division, is where I decided to focus my dissertation research on and to spend years trying to not only learn about the history of this unique group of Igbo people, Igbo women, but also learn more about this female king, Ahebi Ubabe. I would later find out what her name was through years and years of conducting both archival and oral history.
Could you briefly outline then for the listeners the highlights of her life?
Ahebi Ubabe was born in northern Igbo land in a place called Inuezike in around 1880s. She was born in the 1880s. She grew up in the Nsukka region, Inuezike, and when she was a teenager, about
Thanks again for
13 or
helping with Mr.
14,
House's data
I was
network.
told
I'm
by
seeing if you're
my
more
oral
informed
history
than
collaborators
Well,
that all of a
howdy,
sudden she
partner.
disappeared. They said, they use the term ofulefu. She got lost is the interpretation. And I remember when I was asking questions, it took a long time, 2 years, for me to discover the reason why she got lost. They just kept using this terminology, she got lost. And I would ask, how does a 14-year-old get lost? She doesn't all of a sudden get lost. And then they would tell me, oh, she became a prostitute. And I said, was she a prostitute before she got lost or after? And they would always say after as a result of getting lost. So 2 years later, I'm still not satisfied with this information. I, have the opportunity to interview one of the most powerful dibyas in this area. Dibya is a traditional medicine man, a seer. And unbeknownst to me, people around the community viewed him as someone who dabbled in bad medicine. So he was able to kill people, and at the same time, he was also able to elevate the life force of people. So he did both. Obviously, had I known that, he dabbled in bad medicines, maybe I wouldn't have approached him, but I did. And he was the one who revealed what I call the village or the community secret to me, that Ahebi Owabe had in fact been dedicated in marriage to a deity called Ohe. And during this time, dedication to a deity is a form of indigenous slavery. It means that a human being gets married to a spiritual force. And once you're married to this spiritual force, it means that that individual no longer has the right to marry a human being. So you are enslaved to that deity in marriage.
Oh, it's
but
you.
it's also, I call, when I describe this phenomenon to
Sure.
my students, I talk about slavery, indigenous slavery, in the African context,
Oh, it's you.
especially the Nigerian
Ladies
context, the
better
Igbo
stand here.
context, as being both empowering, which is sort of what's happening here, and I'll describe that, but also disempowering. So it's disempowering because she's married to this deity and could not marry a freeborn, even if she were to fall in love with a young man. It's empowering because in marrying the deity extends her power and protection over not just the person that marries the deity, but their entire family. So in that regard, people who are married to deities in northern Igbo land become extremely powerful and are in fact feared by the community. Ahebi Owabe decides that she's not going to marry this deity, so she runs off to Igala land. And it's when she's in Igala land that she becomes a prostitute.
And this is in the north.
This is in the north, the northern part, it's the northern part of Igbo land. This part of Igbo land that Ahebi Owabe is born is the northernest portion of Igbo land, and it has common boundaries with the Igala kingdom. So it's in the Igala kingdom that Ahebi runs to. The Igbo land where Ahebi is from is an egalitarian system. They know no kings. There's a proverb, Iwenwereze, the Igbos have no kings. They don't believe in kings, but the Igala do. And it's in this kinship that Ahebi runs to. She becomes a prostitute. She interacts with the king of Igala. The king of Igala later makes her king, not
Hey,
queen.
no
She's
one
able
but
to come
emeritus are
back.
allowed to
She
carry
becomes
guns into
war in
Gomorrah.
chief.
Check your weapons
And,
with me.
her life takes many twists and turns until she is eventually reined in by the male gerontocratic elite towards the end of the book, so much so that she has to bury herself while she's still alive because she doesn't trust that her community will give her the kind of befitting burial that she feels that someone in her station deserves. And so by ushering her into the world of the spirits. If you're not ushered into the world of the spirits, according to Igbo people, you wander the human world as an evil spirit, and she didn't want to do that. So she presided over her own burial while she was still alive.
In your work, you mentioned that Ahebi was identified in colonial documents only 5 times, I think. Can you tell us then the value of the oral history method in this particular work of
You'll get
yours,
these-
and also the process of doing oral history in northern Igbo land?
Yes, like you said, she was mentioned, I think I counted 5 times. And the 5 times you're talking about a line or two, just saying there's a female warrant chief in northern Eagle Land. They did provide her name, but that was pretty much it. It was later when, after I had spent years, you're talking probably about 5, 6, 7 years, I'd spent time in the community working with the oral history collaborators, and I'll talk some more about them, that I was able to go back to the archive, because you're talking about 6 trips to the archive, and actually unearth a lot of her court documents in which she was the, the president of the court, but that was much later. So it did dawn on me really early on in my research that there was not any way that I'll be able to tell this woman's story without focusing and on oral history. It was very clear because there was just that 1 or 2 references to her. And so earlier on I knew, this would be my only chance of sort of trying to piece together her life. And that's what I did. As an oral historian, I went anywhere I could find evidence. So it wasn't just the use of interviews both men and women, older men and women, but also her descendants about her life and her works and all of that, but using other types of methods to also try to reconstruct, to piece together the history of this incredible woman. One of the methods that I used extensively in my second chapter of this book, where I talk about her life in exile, the portion that I call Ahibi's journeys, was use a technique that I, called geo-mapping. And what that was my oral history collaborators gave me information on certain areas that Ahibi went to when she ran into exile in Igalaland. They just knew a few areas, probably about 3 or 4. And that wasn't enough information to be able to sort of piece together what her life was in exile. But by using a period-specific colonial map, I was able to reconstruct her journeys from her natal village to her mother's village, and pretty much able to track her journeys in Igalaland, knowing that she stopped in, say, 5 different areas. So you're able to sort of connect the dots. In order to get to one area, she would have had to journey to A, B, C, D areas to get to this area that we know that she went to. So I was able to do that extensively in my second chapter in order to reconstruct her journeys in Igalaland. So that was another method. I also use music extensively. Ahibi Obabe, as a warrant chief, had praised me, warrant chief and king, had praised musicians sing her praises. Ahibi Obabe never walked anywhere. She was carried by 4 men on a hammock, even within her palace. She was not known to walk anywhere. And when she appeared, her praise musicians beat the drums, Okanga drums, and they sang her praises and danced in her praise to her. And so I was able to use the lyrics, not just the lyrics, not just figuring out what the praise singers were saying, but also the types of music, whether it's Okanga music versus, because music in Igbo land is very gendered. So there were certain songs that they were singing to her that were only sang to old men. And this happened with Ahibi. So I was also able to, much like an ethnomusicologist, look at the types of music that were sung to Ahibi, and in that way try to also reconstruct and piece together her life. So, in piecing together her life, I spent about 15 years in this area, talking, listening, but most importantly, I think, hearing what it is that my different oral history collaborators were saying to me.
It's very innovative to my mind, and you've reproduced many scores.
Yes.
And I suppose those scores you've also, to some extent, created based upon what you were just saying. And it's also very multidisciplinary, as you mentioned, the mapping, the music, you've got images there, you've used the archives, the oral history, and also language and theatre and performance and literature. And one thing I noticed, which I thought also was very innovative as writing as an African historian, was your use of Igbo chronologies to sort of subvert the colonial, pre-colonial, post-colonial. You've inverted that, and sort of reading back to the empire, you've inserted her own chronologies, or Igbo chronologies. And of course, you explain this at the end with glossary. So I think it's splendidly done. On this whole question of the colonial dimension, clearly you mentioned earlier she was made a warrant chief. So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit about the British colonial dimension here and how she fits in.
I talk about several types of gendered transformations or performances, if you would. I talk about Ahebi performing several types of female masculinities is the way that I describe it. And in terms of the warrant chief institution, when the British started to colonize Nigeria, they set up an overarching system called indirect rule. It was the brainchild, as we know, of Lord Lugard. And he was able to come up with this system by patenting it after the system that he found in place in northern Nigeria. So pretty much what he did was he went to northern Nigeria and said, who are your kings? And the northern Nigeria said, our emirs are our kings. So what the British did was empower the traditional leadership with more power. So you're empowering the traditional institutions, is what indirect rule tried to do. Indirect rule was expedient, it was cheap. And that's one of the main reasons why the British decided to do this. Because if you were to go back further, the British actually introduced direct rule before, much like the system in French colonial Africa. But that just didn't work. So, you know, this indirect rule was Lord Lugard's brainchild.
Give me a
like
shout.
I said, it was expedient, it's cheap. But what they didn't actually, I think, reckon with was the fact that this application could not be applied throughout Nigeria. Yes, it worked in the areas that had kinships or centralized societies where there was a leader, where you could say this person is a king or this person is a chief.
Welcome to the
and what
Ultralux.
have you.
I do hope
what
it
they
exceeds your
didn't sort of think about was
What
what's
else?
going to happen in those areas, in those non-centralized societies, in those egalitarian societies like the Igbo, the Ijaw, the Tiv, that do not have kings, that do not respect kings, that where leadership is more in the community.
A man.
The community leads itself. They didn't factor that in. And so what they did in those particular communities is that they created even larger. They mapped out, they remapped Nigeria and put these smaller communities together and then created a fake kingship, which they called a warrant chief. And it was simply a piece of paper. The piece of paper was your warrant of office. And what the British would do was pretty much single out, these were young, what is it called?
Caesar's fate was
Opportunistic
sealed from
men
the start.
who befriended the British, and they were given these pieces of paper that said that they had made them king. And not only giving them these pieces of paper, but giving them unforeseen powers, the kind of power that they never had in pre-colonial society. Remember that you're talking about a gerontocracy where, yes, the community rules itself, but it's elders within the community. So male community elders rule the male part of society, and female community elders rule the female portion of society. These young men really didn't have a place in the day-to-day ruling of society. And it's this same position that the British are able to bestow on Ahebi Obabe when she comes back to Igwe from Dalaland. They do it because she is the only person at that time who knows and understands Pidgin English. So she's the only person that can communicate with the British.
Good.
The person that was in office before her, who was headman,
I'm in a bind.
Ahebi Obabe has
I've been planning
a number
he's got a powerful
of transformations. She first becomes a female headman.
Yes.
The headman
the
who was
wrong
there
person.
before her could not
We
speak
scouted
English.
the right one
He didn't
for
know
weeks.
Igala.
The heir
He
to a
didn't know
mercantile
Nupe, any of the
empire.
languages that
He cut
the
ties
British
with his
used in
family
their
and left their
day-to-day
estate to
running
wander.
of society.
Unfortunately,
so they
the trap my
displaced this
subordinate
headman,
set for
made
him
Ahebi
failed.
headman, and eventually warrant chief. She was one of 3 warrant chiefs appointed.
I asked for a last-minute
and she was
replacement,
appointed
and they stole the son of the most dangerous Brahmin baron in New Vegas while he stayed at this.
And one of the major services
Needless to say,
was that she
this could be
actually
a
led
disaster if
the
things
British
aren't put
into
back the way they
invading
should
from
be.
Igallaland.
And I still
she
need
showed
somebody.
the British
Strictly
the
speaking,
routes through
we're
which
no
to
longer
conquer her
allowed
people.
to eat people.
And in my estimation, I believe that she did this to
I need a
repay her
replacement.
people
And I need the boy
for
taken care of.
pretty much
The replacement
dedicating
must be
her,
healthy and
turning her
well-bred.
into an indigenous
With so
slave,
little time,
and
we'll have to
forcing
go
her
after
into
our
a life
original
of
choice,
exile and a life of
Carlisle St.
prostitution.
Clair.
So that was payback.
He lives in a
big
shack
time
north of here.
when she,
For freshness,
pretty much revealed
if you could
the
send him
routes
here or
through
knock
which to
him out
conquer her
with
people.
this
And for
and
that,
drag him into the dumpster
British
next to his-
patted her on the back with this real powerful position of warrant chief.
Ted
and
Gunderson
mind you,
is
at this
his
time,
name.
all over British Africa,
But if he won't
there
listen,
were only
we
male
can't very well
warrant
let him
chiefs.
go.
So before
We'll
I
have to-
discovered
But you would need to
Ibuwaba's
deal with his
history,
father, Heck.
all of the
Perhaps if
canon
you could
out
smear
there
some of
talked
Ted's
about
blood
the fact
around his
that the
father's
warrant
hotel.
chief institution was entirely male. There were no female warrant chiefs. So what she does, what the story does, is that it is sort of, what's the term? Revising, if you would, the received canon. And it's saying, look, yes, for the most part, but, it's much more complicated. The story is much more complicated than that.
And it's particularly fascinating to me because the 1929 Aba Women's War is often held up
Yes.
How may I
as
be
the
of
classic
service, sir?
case
Exactly.
of women's agency, African women's
Yes.
agency and resistance
Yes.
against colonialism.
Yes.
And yet what your story seems to show, as you just indicated, is that there's a gray area
Yes, there's-
between collaboration and resistance.
Exactly.
You want to
Hers
expand
is a-
on that?
Yes, certainly.
Splendid,
Hers is a
splendid.
counter-narrative to that.
The boy
to that
is being
story.
held in the kitchen.
Before I discovered
The elder
her,
Gunderson is
the
staying in
canon
our
out there
penthouse.
was
I
that
understand he's hired
Igbo
security,
women
so be
as a
careful.
group lost
And our Mr.
power
St. Clair
during the colonial
resides
period.
to the north.
During the pre-colonial
He rarely
period,
strays
Igbo
far from
women
his
were
house, and he
active participants in the political running of their communities. And I agree. That's very true. With colonialism, for the most part, women were removed from positions of authority. They were like the Victorian era. The British felt that women should be trained to become good wives. And so that went against the training that pre-colonial Igbo women received earlier on. And so when you talk about the Aba Women's War, Ogumwanyi in Igbo, the Women's War, what had happened is that in 1929, Igbo women in southern Igbo land, my group of Igbo women are northern Igbo land, so the Women's War didn't really reach northern Igbo land, but southern Igbo women got fed up with the abuses of these male warrant chiefs. They were so corrupt. They would force women into marriage. They would take away women's crops and all sorts of stuff that the women didn't like. So the women decided to rise up and make war. And they used some of the strategies that women employed in the pre-colonial era to punish wrongdoing against men. They evolved these same strategies, specifically the strategy of sitting on a man or making war on a man.
What do you think you're
and what
doing?
did Igbo women do? They turned this thing around and made war on the colonial government. So the man in question became the colonial government. But Igbo women in southern Igbo land used the same strategies of nudity as protest to make war on the colonial government.
Yes.
But on the flip
He
side,
was
you
none
have
too
the story of this woman who not only didn't make war on the colonial government, in fact, you could argue that all of her power came from an association with the colonial government. So here we have a counter-narrative to the received canon, where not only did she not lose power, in fact, she was disempowered before the colonial government came because she was dedicated to a deity. She had to run off, become a prostitute and all of that. But it's with the coming of the colonial government that she was able to regain power and gain a kind of autocratic kind of power that had no place in pre-colonial society, that was so foreign to this group of Igbo people that they eventually said enough is enough and reined her in.
My daddy's got a lot of
yes, her
enemies.
story is
It don't make
certainly
no
a
sense
turning
that the
point.
white pants society would kidnap me. He's here to do business with them. Well, you got a point.
Because
But if you don't know who it is, my daddy's going to be awful mad. He ain't got
And part of
All
that
right.
may be also relates to a very powerful, I think, part of your book where you talk about performance and masquerade.
Yes.
And there was, as you show, an even earlier female king in Igala Kingdom, and this has come down to us in part through stories of leopards.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier your first love was theatre performance, and so I found it quite riveting to read this section of your wonderful book where you talk about the sort of unmasking, if we can use an ambiguous term. Perhaps you could just tell the listeners a little bit about this fascinating sort of climactic episode to her power.
And before I do that, I think that it's probably important for me to set it up a little bit so that people understand why that was such a major event in her life, is that in Igbo land, as much of not only Nigeria but Africa, sex and gender do not coincide in pre-colonial society. Therefore, biological sex obviously is different from gender. You can be born female but become male in terms of your gender. So gender becomes a social construct. You can be born male but become female in terms of your gender. And so those institutions were not foreign in Igbo land. And it's those institutions that Ahebe was able to tap into in her gendered transformation from woman to headman, then warrant chief, which was exclusively male, then king, and then finally what I call full man, which is a performance of masquerading in Igbo land. Masquerading, not only in Igbo land, but in all of West Africa, is that institution that differentiates not only biological, but gendered men from women. It not only differentiates men from women, but it also differentiates what I term regular men, ordinary men, from full men. Who or what are full men? Full men are men who have undergone in Igbo land what is called Itwa Ifuma, which means unveiling the masquerade in its nakedness. And it's a kind of, what's the term? Initiation. Thank you very much. But even more than an initiation, it's that which separates boys from men in
coming of age.
Coming of age.
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage, exactly. So that in Igbo land, if you are an 18-year-old young man, and you undergo this process of initiation, coming to manhood, it's sort of like the circumcision in, among the Kikuyu, for instance, of East Africa. That's what initiation is, that which determines manhood in Igbo land. If you are an 18-year-old young man who's gone through initiation, you're constructed as a man. If you're an 80-year-old elder who has not gone through this initiation, this unveiling of a masquerade, you're considered a boy. So, the masquerade cult is that which separates not just men from women, but regular men from full men. Ahebe Obabe, in her attempt to achieve what I call full manhood, which is total and complete manhood, she's already become a headman, she's become a warrant chief, she's become a king, but she decides that that's not enough for her. It's not enough for her in part because it was foreign institutions or foreign cultures that aided her transformation into headman. The British aided that. Warrant chief came entirely out of the British institution. The institution of king, becoming a king, came out of Igala land. None of this came out of her Igbo land. So it's almost as though to prove to her people, I am not just a man, I am a full man. Ahebe Obabe did something that was totally and completely unheard of. She came out with her own masquerade, and this masquerade was called Ebe Ahebe, and it was the most beautiful masquerade that the community had ever seen. So coming out with a masquerade means that that masquerade undresses in front of you. So Ahebe had in essence gone through the initiation, the Itwa Ifuma, unveiling the masquerade.
She claimed to be a full man.
Yes, she was part of it. So in a particular episode, climactic episode in this book, the community seizes the masquerade from Ahebe. In the life of the community, there are festivals where masquerades perform, they dance, they greet the elders of the community. So Ahebe Obabe brought out her Ebe masquerade to greet the oldest men in the community and to pay them honor. And when this masquerade approached the oldest man, he took off his hat, which is a symbol that an abomination had happened. And he spoke to Ahebe directly and said, what are you doing? Don't you know that it's an abomination for a woman to bring out a masquerade? And that's all he said. And he just sort of signaled to his boys to escort the masquerade from the festival to the back. And this masquerade was never seen again. So they seized this masquerade. This was the beginning of the end of Ahebe's power. From that point on, once they seized this masquerade, her power as supernatural, because she had constructed herself as supernatural. She had these medicine men come in and concoct these medicines that were believed to make her supernaturally powerful. In fact, they believed that these medicines would usurp the soul of other individuals and use that to make her supernaturally powerful.
Really, with my reputation, there aren't many places I can go that'll have
her power just unraveled.
My own family.
You know, she just sort of became an ordinary person. Not only an ordinary person, but a person who was laughed at.
I've heard of
the
them.
Village,
Ultralux,
almost
right?
Like, no, I wouldn't call her a village bum, but certainly someone who was not respected. Out of this
okay, maybe I will.
certain songs that the villagers composed to ridicule Ahebe, to say that you were once, you know, this big thing, this man, this huge spirit. Now you are a nobody. You're a useless person. And that was the beginning of the end for Ahebe. You know, her power just sort of unraveled.
To what extent are these remarkable links between gender and culture, power, identity, an Igbo thing, if you permit this simplification? Can we generalize about these processes unfolding perhaps elsewhere in Nigeria or in other West African or even African societies?
In terms of Ahebe's story, I would say that, and I think that's what makes her story so fascinating, is that it's so unique. I think you can generalize about certain things. I think you can generalize about the kind of power that certainly West African women had, and I would actually argue as a gender historian, African women had in general. I just think that the types of power the different groups of African women had might not be the kind of power that neatly fits into what it is that we understand in the West as power. So I argue for, power within the religious realm. For instance, if you look at the Nyamwezi of East Africa, one might argue those women weren't that powerful. But I would say, yes, they were, but in a different way. They were powerful in the religious realm. They were able to become spirit mediums, and as spirit mediums, they became, exceptionally powerful as spirit mediums. So there were different forms of power. But I think that Ahebe's story is certainly unique in the sense of this type of individualized, autocratic type of power. And this is not to say that in areas where you had kinship societies, in East Africa and Southern Africa where you had the queens, the rain queens, and all of that, yes, these women were powerful. But I think that Ahebe's, her display of power was in many senses unique to her and also to the environment that she emerged out of. I don't know that there would be an Ahebe today. I don't know, because I think that it's the environment that sort of created this person, Ahebe.
I'm sure this is great food for thought for our listeners, and I would hope that some of them are thinking about filling the remaining gaps in African gender history as a result. And I think that you're maybe coming back to the colonial guys in your next book. Will that be a different tack?
My next, I have two big projects that I'm working on. The first is a history textbook on women and gender in Africa. So that's a different type of research. Enjoyable, but it's not, my personal research. My second project, which is at the very beginning stages, it's going to take me away from, I think, my comfort zone, working on Igbo women and all of that. For the first time, I'm going to be looking, it's a history of the colonial enterprise in Nigeria. I'm still going to sort of tap into my love of oral histories, and it's going to be looking at a particular epoch in history, the early 50s to independence, and probably touching on the Nigerian-Biafran Civil War, but through a different lens, because a lot has been written about, the colonial enterprise. I want to give it a more human, if you would, side to it. So I want to look at life histories of British colonial officers that served in colonial Nigeria. My fascination with this is, trying to answer the question of what moves someone to move from England to serve, at that point in dark Africa at the time that they did. And I really sort of want to trace their lives from much earlier on, from boyhood to, them being colonial officers in Nigeria. So it's very much looking at both public and private lives, but at a very important point in Nigerian history, just before independence, and also looking at the allegation that the British helped rig Nigeria's first election to favor northern Nigeria, who the British obviously didn't have problems with northern Nigeria. It's after the northern Nigerians that they patented indirect rule. And so the allegation is out there that the first elections were rigged to favor northern Nigerians and the northern Nigerian elites. And as you know, this triggers and really causes problems that we later see with the Nigerian Biafran War later on. So that's what I am interested in looking at. And like I said, I'm at the very, very beginning stages.
Any word as to our
arrangement? No, it's fascinating, and you will have gone the full circle from the history of Igbo women to the history of British colonial men.
Well,
thanks
you've
so
done very well
much
in keeping this business low-key.
I
appreciate your discretion. I'll be sure to drop your name.
Past and Present
I hope
is
you
a
understand what a
co-production of
tremendous
Matrix,
boon
the
this
Center
will...
for Humane Arts, Letters, and Social Sciences Online,
We'll know
and the
after
Department
tonight's
of History
banquet at
at
7
Michigan
o'clock.
State University. Our
That
producer
way,
is Annette Janino.
they will all have
Technical
crossed the
assistance
same
is
silly
provided
taboo.
by the Matrix staff.
They'll have to...
For more information
It's all
about this
image
and
with
other
her anyway.
episodes, and to subscribe
She just
to the
needs to
podcast, you
realize-
can visit our website at Afripod, that's AFRIPOD.AODL.org. Africa Past and Present is also available on iTunes and other podcaster sites. To get in touch with us, send us email at africa.podcast@matrix.msu.edu. Thanks for listening.
I heard there used to be tribals.